Good morning. Hey, that's nice. My name's Matt, like Grant said, and welcome to the first of 4 talks, like Viana's been saying, on the topic, Jesus is all about life. And today I want to look at, in particular, Jesus is all about freedom. Like Grant said, I'm going to read from the Bible for us now, our Bible reading. This is a reading from Galatians chapter 5. It's in the New Testament. It's written by the Apostle Paul. Just a bit of a caveat. There are some weird things in here. A few things that are a bit uncomfortable, a bit confronting, but you'll be fine. You'll be fine. And we'll explore it together and figure out what it means together. So Galatians chapter 5, it'll also be on the screen. I think, have you got it up? Have you got it there? Yeah, great. Thanks so much. Galatians chapter 5, verse 1. It says this: "It is for freedom that Christ has set us free. Stand firm then, and do not let yourselves be burdened again by a yoke of slavery. Mark my words, I, Paul, tell you that if you let yourselves be circumcised, Christ will be of no value to you at all. Again, I declare to every man who lets himself be circumcised that he is required to obey the whole law. You who are trying to be justified by the law have been alienated from Christ. You have fallen away from grace. For through the Spirit we eagerly await by faith the righteousness for which we hope. For in Christ Jesus neither circumcision nor uncircumcision has any value. The only thing that counts is faith expressing itself through love. You were running a good race. Who cut in on you to keep you from obeying the truth? That kind of persuasion does not come from the one who calls you. A little yeast works through the whole batch of dough. I am confident in the Lord that you will take no other view. The one who is throwing you into confusion, whoever that may be, will have to pay the penalty. Brothers and sisters, if I'm still preaching circumcision, why am I still being persecuted? In that case, the offense of the cross has been abolished. As for those agitators, I wish they would go the whole way and emasculate themselves. You, my brothers and sisters, were called to be free, but do not use your freedom to indulge the flesh. Rather, serve one another humbly in love. For the entire law is fulfilled in keeping this one command: love your neighbor as yourself. If you bite and devour each other, watch out, or you will be destroyed by each other." How'd you go? Okay? Emasculation. It's great to have you at church. It's a bit weird, a bit uncomfortable, but actually, I think this text holds the keys to freedom. Paul said this at the beginning. He said, "It is for freedom that Christ has set us free." I want to talk to you about that today. Have you ever had an experience of a newfound freedom? Maybe you got your driver's license at 17, 18, and you were free to hit the open road. All you found yourself really doing was driving yourself and your mates to school. The opposite of freedom. What about moving out of home? Woo! No one to tell you how to live, what to eat. You can do whatever you want, when to go to bed. No one telling you to do that. Then you find yourself spending all your money on rent and all your weekends cleaning. Perhaps more seriously, you've experienced the freedom of being able to leave one country to start a new life somewhere else. Perhaps the freedom of speech, being able to voice your own opinion. Perhaps you've been able to have a job or a career previously unavailable to somebody like you. Perhaps you enjoy the freedom of expression, whatever that may be. Freedom is the main theme of our society. Freedom is the most important value that we have. It has been said freedom is perhaps the only publicly shared and acknowledged moral that we have today. Today, we consider freedom to be self-evident, a given truth that everybody knows intuitively and that cannot be questioned. You think about it, we measure progress in society in increasing freedoms. We talk about how far we've come in the 20th and 21st centuries, don't we, in the last 6 or 7 decades. The 60s and 70s were about civil rights. and freedoms. The 50s and 60s, the 60s and 70s were about women's rights. Whoa, hey, there it goes. Let me come back here. The 60s and 70s were about freedom for women and sexual freedom. The 80s in China, we saw a fighting for political freedom. And the last few decades, we've seen minority groups receive freedoms like never before. And now, increasingly, we talk about your personal individual freedom and your freedom of self-expression. Charles Taylor, this is him, a Canadian philosopher. He held a chair at Oxford University for a number of years as a professor of social and political theory. He said freedom in our society today is defined as something like this. He said, let each person do their own thing. And one shouldn't criticize the other's values because they've got a right to live their own life as you do. This kind of freedom is everywhere today. And it's deep inside of us. It's so deeply ingrained inside of us. The American national anthem, anyone watched the Super Bowl about a month ago? There were tears throughout the whole stadium. 113 million people watched it. Probably one of the biggest moments in it was when people were singing of the land of young and free. One of the most moving moments. We have a national anthem also that proclaims that we are young and free. Here's another anthem, perhaps sung much more often, closer to all of our hearts. In Frozen, this was, for 5 years' time, the highest grossing film of all time. And Elsa sung, it's time to see what I can do to test the limits and break through. No right, no wrong, no rules for me, I'm free. Let it go, let it go. I'm sorry for the earworm. Perhaps the most important and popular slogan for freedom today, and count how many times you say it to someone today, is you do you. You do you. You do you, right? I've said it 10 times this week for sure. You do you. You do you. So if society has come so far, and if this is working for us, if this kind of freedom is working for us, what does Jesus have to offer? What does Jesus have to offer when he says he offers us freedom, a life to the full? What does Christianity have to offer? What kind of freedom? I want to ask some questions of that passage that we read from the Bible this morning. What is freedom? What's the freedom Jesus offers? What's the alternative to it? How do you get it? What does it look like? But let's start this morning with what is freedom. What is this kind of freedom that Jesus offers? Well, the Apostle Paul wrote, first line here, it is for freedom that Christ has set us free. And this is one of the most profound sentences in the whole of the New Testament. Commentators have said this sums up the facts of Christianity, everything it's based on, and it sums up the purpose of Christianity, everything Christianity is for. What's it based on? Apparently it's based on freedom. What's its purpose? It's for freedom. Now, I imagine some of you are sitting here thinking, I'm inside a church building, a traditional Anglican church building. And there's a guy at the front talking about freedom. This is crazy. This is not freedom. Because most people think, don't they, Christianity equals bondage, captivity. You think about it. People think something like Christianity means no sex outside of marriage. Well, surely there's a stamping down on personal freedoms. It means going to church on the weekend. You don't get a full weekend. That's even worse. Giving financially to church. Forcing people to assent to the belief that there is a God. That's not freedom. That's not intellectual freedom. That's not allowing people to think freely. And here's the big killer. Not only do I have to believe there's a God, I've got to live in a way that pleases him. I've got to justify my life before God. I've got to be a good boy or a good girl. There goes the freedom to do whatever you feel like doing. And you've got to take your cues from a book. Surely that's not freedom. You know, I've read articles, you've read them too, in the papers. I'm sure there's one in the paper this weekend that says something like, if you suppress your sexuality, if you don't act on or follow your impulse, whatever it might be, you'll end up psychologically broken. It'll be damaging to you. You need to be rescued from that. You need to be released from outdated, psychologically damaging bondage like that. That's the current Western view on Christianity, isn't it? So how can Christianity be freedom? What on earth is Paul talking about? Well, throughout his whole letter, he's been pretty clear and pretty specific, but here he just gives us some shorthand. It is for freedom that Christ has set us free. But I want you to just notice those last 4 words there. Christ has set us. Has. Notice the past tense there. Christ has done something already in the past that sets us free. And he's talking about what Christianity is all about, the cross of Jesus Christ. What happened there? How could a man nailed to a cross bring about freedom for others? Well, Paul said, I read it to you, he said, it makes one righteous. It makes us righteous. That simply means to be made right with God, to have a good relationship with him. In fact, better than that, a perfect relationship with God. Paul's saying Jesus was found guilty. He was found condemned. He was nailed on the cross under the judgment of God in our place, taking the punishment that we deserve so that we could be forgiven, so that we could be found right, so that we could be justified, made free before God, and so we could enter into a free relationship, a perfectly good relationship with God. And so how's the Christian free? Well, Christ frees them from a guilty conscience. You're guilt-free. The Christian's guilt-free. Free from any fear of God's anger for how you live. You're free from having to try and earn God's approval. You're free from the weight, the anxious burden of trying to be right with God. That's Christian freedom. That's how Christ, that's the offer that Jesus has of freedom. Now you might be thinking, Matt, I do not care. I don't believe there's a God. So whoosh, there goes any expectation, any burden. Who cares? There's no God. I'm free. Well, that's very interesting because the Apostle Paul talks about that. What is the alternative to having the freedom Jesus offers? This is point 2 now. What's the alternative? What's the alternative? Jesus offers one kind of freedom. What is the actual alternative? Paul addresses this. The Bible actually addresses this. And it says something like, all of us actually deep down care about this. We care about being right with God. We might just not articulate it in the same way. It says all of us seek approval. All of us seek belonging. All of us want to be a part of something bigger than ourselves. All of us are looking for some kind of justification for our lives, some kind of meaning. We're all trying to prove our worth to someone, no matter how you do it. You don't have to be religious. You don't have to have a moral construct around your life, but we all want to try and prove our worth to someone. Look at this. This is in verse 1. I promise we will get through this text in a few more minutes. But he says, it's for freedom of Christ to set us free. He says to these Galatians, stand firm then and do not let yourselves be burdened again by a yoke of slavery. Let me try and explain what's happening here. It is really interesting that Paul says to these particular people, don't be burdened again. Don't be burdened again. Who's Paul writing to? He's writing to a bunch of people who live in a secular city called Galatia. And most of the people he's writing to are not religious. Not traditionally religious in the way that you and I would talk about it. They're not Jews. They're not Jewish. They don't have any religious burdens, any traditional moral burdens. And we have this letter because Paul's writing to this group because a small handful of Jewish people, Jewish believers, have entered within their church. They've rocked up and they're saying not only to be right with God do you need Jesus, but you also need the Jewish moral and ceremonial practices and customs, hence circumcision. Let me just What is circumcision? Circumcision for the Jews was a way of saying, I am going to please God by obeying all the Jewish moral laws, and this is where it starts. Me and my family, this is where it starts. But what's really interesting is about the Galatians. Paul writes to them and he says, don't be burdened again. He's not writing to Jewish people, he's writing to the Galatians, the free people. He's saying, don't be burdened again. And that's interesting because I think we would look at their lives and how they're living, and we would say they are free. They're very free. Have a look at this. This is verse 19 and 21. And Paul kind of just in his research, he's been to Galatia, he knows them, he describes them for us. He says basically they slept with whoever they wanted, whenever they wanted, however they wanted. They drank as much as they wanted, whenever they wanted, however they wanted. They had orgies. They did whatever they wanted, whenever they wanted, however they wanted. You and I would say they're free. That boy, that girl, that guy, that woman, she's free to live like that. That sounds like freedom. We would say they're free. No rules, no right, no wrong, no rules for me. I'm free. You do you, the Galatians said to one another. And yet Paul says you are in slavery if you live like that. You are enslaved. In fact, he calls twice in the book of Galatians, the chapter previous, he says, if you live like that, you are enslaved to the basic principles of the world. You're in slavery. How is that slavery? They're just living normal lives. And you think this is ridiculous. I want to help convince you of this by sharing with you an interview with the cultural icon of our time. The American singer-songwriter, actress, queen of pop, Madonna, in an interview for Vogue magazine a number of years ago, she said this. She said, my drive in life comes from a fear of being mediocre. That's always pushing me. I push past one spell of it and discover myself as a special human being, but then I feel I'm still mediocre and uninteresting unless I do something else. Because though I have become somebody, I still have to prove that I am somebody. My struggle has never ended, and I guess it never will. Do you feel her? What Madonna is saying is you're in slavery. Even if you have everything the world has to offer and you're living the free life, you're in slavery. Paul is saying this is for you, the non-religious person who says, I've thrown off my religious shackles. I'm free. Paul says, no, you're not. Madonna says, no, you're not. And Paul is saying whether you're a Jew following God's moral codes, trying to do that, or whether you're irreligious, trying to define life for yourself and trying to be free, and maybe you've even got everything like Madonna, he's saying without Christ, you are in slavery. That's Paul's point. He says the only alternative to the freedom that Jesus has to offer, the only alternative is always only slavery. No matter how you live, no matter what your philosophy is, your spirituality is, no matter what code you live by, no matter how self-expressive you are, no matter what your lifestyle is, without Christ, you're enslaved. Because, like Madonna shared with us so genuinely and so openly, you have this unquenchable, insatiable drive to prove yourself, to be somebody, to be loved, to be valued, to be accepted. You are in bondage because none of these things, moralism, amoralism, none of them will save you because you'll always need to justify yourself again and again and again and again and again. It'll never fulfill you because they can never take away that sense of justification. Perhaps for a second, perhaps for a day, perhaps for a short moment in your life, you will feel good about yourself. Paul says, get circumcised. The first thing you've got to do to follow Jewish customs and laws, it might give you your spiritual fix, your ticket for a moment. You might feel good for a moment. Actually, you'll feel bad for about 2 weeks. But then maybe you'll feel proud. But then you'll be obligated to keep the 1,000 other laws because you've said, this is how I'm going to prove myself to God. This is how I'm going to be right. Likewise, you try and find your value and your worth in something other than Christ. Maybe it's your money, your reputation, your kids, your family, your lifestyle, political view, being successful, famous, defining yourself for yourself. You'll feel good for a moment, perhaps, when you get that job, or you get some more money, you have a bit of a reputation, but you'll always require another hit. You're enslaved. You're on the treadmill. And Paul uses the term, you are burdened. You're burdened by a yoke of slavery. You're burdened. It sucks. This is no way to live. You can't get yourself out. It doesn't work. It's not having fun. It's not enjoying life. It is not freedom. So how do you get it? Point 3, how do you get it? How do you find this freedom? How do you be truly free? Well, if freedom is the truly unburdened life, having a guilt-free conscience, if it's forgiveness, if it's the unanxious life, you don't have to prove yourself every year, every week, every day. How do you get it? How do you actually get it? Just notice for a moment how much the Bible cares about your freedom. Just notice how much Christianity cares. Just notice how much the Apostle Paul cares. This is that little rude bit. I had to mention it. But really, this is what it's about. It's about how much Paul cares about you getting your freedom. He says, as for those agitators, those people coming in and throwing you into confusion about your freedom, I wish they'd go the whole way and emasculate themselves. This is a little bit confronting, but what he's saying is this. He's saying your freedom and how you get it is so important to him that those who try and take it from you, those who try and take it away, who try and mislead you, try and confuse you about freedom, by telling you even perhaps, especially the religious types who tell you something that Christianity is something that it's not, they deserve to have their balls chopped off. His words, my translation. Paul cares that you know about how to be free. Jesus cares about your freedom. So how do you get it? Well, this passage is actually about people who are losing it. They had it, they're losing it, and so it's a good place to look to figure out how to get it. Notice this in verse 4, Paul writes, you who are trying to be justified the law have been alienated from Christ. That's how people lose it. They're trying. They're trying. They're trying too hard, and they're trying to find it in all the wrong places. You know, let me ask you, how are you trying to find your freedom? How are you trying to justify your life before God? You know, most people I meet, or a lot of people I meet, when I encounter people, I had this experience this week. Somebody met me, found out I was a minister. He called me a pastor. He called me a priest. I was, okay. He said, Matt, on your way, he said, tell God I've been a good boy this week. You know, I was like, you tell him. You know, other people, Matt, all religions, they're all the same. You know, as long as you're kind, as long as you're a good person, you'll be fine. Another kind of person will say, I don't care about any of those kind of things. I define my own life. I create myself. All those people are just trying to justify themselves. They're trying. But Paul says the only way you get truly free is only if you let Jesus be your justification between you and God. Him and nothing else. Nothing else. Him and nothing else. And you got to hold on to him and nothing else. How do you do that? You accept the message we've been talking about that's often offensive. Paul calls it offensive. It's offensive in part because you can't define life for yourself. You can't define what matters for you, what doesn't matter, no right, no wrong, no rules for me. Because surprisingly enough, you didn't create you. You were born into this world and somebody smarter, wiser, more loving than you made it. And all of your trying to be your own God, your own center of the universe, your own author is actually a rejection of his grace, a rejection of his love, a rejection of his authorship, and deserves his disapproval. It's not how he made you. But to accept Jesus and what he's done is to have God say to you, I love you. And I love you to the full extent of my own son. You're accepted to the extent of my own son. You are my child. You are my son. You're accepted. You're trusted to the extent that I trust my son. You're valued to the extent that I trust him. You are honored and approved of, and you're just perfectly welcome here as much as my own son. And to the extent that you grab hold of Jesus and go, I am justified before God in Christ alone, is to the extent you will truly feel free. You'll truly be free. And to the extent that you let go of every other claim, trying to be good, trying to make up your own life, to the extent that you're willing to let go of those things and just grab onto him, is to the extent you will actually be free. And Jesus himself said this. He said, if you're trying to hang on to your own life, you'll lose it. But if you give up your life for my sake, you'll save it. You've got to let go of every other claim to your freedom to enjoy freedom. A friend of mine told me a story about how one day he was invited to the cricket over here at the SCG, one of the tests in January, February, a number of years ago. And a friend of his had 2 tickets, and so he was the +1 to the event. He was super excited. He didn't have his own ticket. He was packed out first day at the SCG. And anyway, he spent the night before getting prepared, as you do for 5 days of cricket, right? You've got to get prepared. And so he packed an esky for himself. Has anyone done this? No, it's just, right? Some people looking at me. I don't even know what cricket is. It's cool. Anyway, so he cuts his own lunch, his sandwiches. He cuts some carrot, gets some snacks ready. You're there for a whole day, so he packs some fruit for the morning, some snacks for the afternoon, maybe some chocolate in there, some drinks. He's perfectly organised his esky. He's got his ice blocks in there, puts a note on the fridge not to forget the frozen grapes that he's put in there for the morning. Gets it all ready. Spends all night getting it. Gets up at 5 a.m. the next day. Drives over here to Moore Park, parks the car. 5 a.m. he's there. It's a typical day at the first day of the Sydney Test. It's cold and it's raining. We're not going to watch any cricket today. That's okay. Anyway, he gets there. He's lining up in the queue. He's got his esky, he's got his bags. He's ready to go spend his day at the cricket. And I forgot to mention this. He loves cricket. I used to work with the guy, and he'd take 4 or 5 days annual leave for the test. He'd leave his wife and kids at home. This is not advice. This is just his story. And he'd go. This is when he was much younger. Anyway, he's really excited. So he gets there at 5 a.m. The queue's pretty long. He's there with his esky. Everyone's there with their eskies and their jackets. And he's waiting to go in. And a couple of hours later, his mate rocks up. And his mate says to him, hey, sweet, you're here, great, let's go. Actually, this is our queue over here. So they get out of that one, they get into the other one. It's a bit shorter. My friend's stoked about that. And the line's getting shorter. Eventually, they get to the security checkpoint. They check in. They're checking through his bags. His bags are all good. But the security guy says to him, you can't take your esky. You can't take your esky through here, mate. I'm sorry. And he's standing there absolutely devastated. He's like, mate, do you know how long I have spent building this feast for today? I got my first drinks. What do they call it, cricket? First drinks, second drinks, third drinks, and then it's morning tea. And then he's got his 11s in there, and then his lunch, and then afternoon tea, and then I got dinner in there. Mate, do you know how much this is like? This is my day. The guy's like, sorry, mate, you can't bring it. You can't bring it through here. I'm sorry. Eventually he decides, I've got to leave it. And he leaves it there. He takes his other bag. He leaves it there. Goes through the checkpoint. Follows his mate under some stairs. Around the back of the seats at the end of the wicket where it's kind of the best seats. And then past the members stand. He goes up another staircase. They're trying to find their seat, he assumes. Anyway, he starts. His mate takes him through the Hall of Fame. And then through the Bradman Lounge. And they get seated in the VIP suite of the SCG. And somebody ushers them to their seats and brings them some hors d'oeuvres and some drinks, and then a little while later, some more hors d'oeuvres, some more drinks. For lunch, they get a 3-course meal. And with silver service, somebody's bringing them everything. They get their little pepisea butter. And their bread roll, and some more free drinks on the house. Imagine if he held on to the esky. Imagine if you held on to the esky. If you want freedom, you've got to give up the stuff you're trying to bring. Your good works, you've got to let your good works go. Your pride about your good works. Your sense of self-justification, you've got to let it go. You've got to leave it. Jesus says, I offer you unparalleled views of the SCG. I'm offering you freedom. You want to bring your esky? You got to drop it. You got to leave it. You can't. Jesus says you can't bring that where you can't come if you're trying to hold on to that. You can come if you follow me, if you trust me. You're in, and you're free. So what does it look like? So I'm truly free. I've got a guilt-free conscience before God. I'm forgiven. I'm set free to live this unparalleled freedom. I can do whatever I want now, right? Well, kind of, but better than that. Have a look at verse 13 with me. He says, you, my brothers and sisters, were called to be free, but do not use your freedom to indulge the flesh. Do not use your freedom to indulge the flesh. Rather, serve one another humbly in love. The modern definition of freedom is something like indulge the flesh, right? It's do whatever you want, whenever you want, however you want. But I want to put it to you that I think it's actually pretty unhelpful. It's pretty unworkable. It doesn't work. It won't make you happy. I hope that's clear. Because there is something else. There is something that trumps that kind of way of living, that kind of freedom. There's something else that trumps that kind of freedom. See, a 60-year-old man is free to eat whatever he wants. You're free to eat whatever you want. If you don't want to grow up and do everything you can within your power to live a long life to see your grandkids and to experience life with them. A university student is free to party all the time. You are free to party all the time as a university student, as long as you don't want the freedom to pursue the degree you're getting and the career that you want. A lover is free to leave town and whatever weekend, as frequently as they want, whenever they want, on the spur of the moment, and with whoever they want, and not include their partner. They're free to do that as long as they're not interested in keeping that relationship together. There are freedoms, but true freedom comes from choosing the freedoms that best align with reality. True freedom looks like choosing the freedoms that best align with reality, with what's best for you. The classic examples of this, of course, are the fish and the bird. I'm sure you've heard this. You know, the fish, is the fish really free if it decides it doesn't want to live in its bowl, prefer to be on the couch? You know, is the fish really free there? Where is the bird most free? The bird is most free in the air when it's flying because it's got wings. It was made for that. What are humans made for? What does freedom look like for us? What environment enables us to enjoy freedom, to experience life? What environment sets us free? It's love. It's loving relationships. It doesn't have to be romantic relationships. Not talking about that. Paul says, don't use your freedom to indulge the flesh. Serve one another humbly in love. You see, Christianity is not, the Christian message is not a set of rules restricting human desire and behavior that's psychologically damaging and out to ruin your life and destroy your freedom. No, it's God showing us we were made to love. We were designed for love and relationships. That's what we're built for. And He's freed us from the endless and exhausting search and the destruction we cause in one another's lives when we try and do life differently in our own way. The late English pastor and theologian John Stott, he put it like this. He said, true freedom is freedom to be my true self, as God made me and meant me to be. And God made me for loving. But, and here's the startling Christian paradox, loving is giving, it's self-giving, it's constrictive. Therefore, in order to be myself, I have to deny myself. I have to give myself. In order to be free, I have to serve. In order to live, I have to die to my own self-centeredness. In order to find myself, I have to lose myself in loving. He goes on, true freedom then is the exact opposite of what many people think. It's not being free from responsibility to God and others so I can live for myself. That's bondage to my own self-centeredness. Instead, true freedom is freedom from my silly little self so I can live in love for God and for others. What's that all about? Has anyone seen the movie Free Guy? Anyone seen Free Guy? Okay. I highly recommend it. It's a great film. Yeah, sorry. Oh, thanks, Bianna. Bianna saw it. Yeah, great. I was speaking to somebody before who used one of their Dine and Discover vouchers to go and see it. I was like, where are those gone? Different government now, right? Might not get them. That's all right. No comment. Free Guy. I'll try not... No, I'm going to ruin it for you. Spoiler alert. I'm going to completely spoil this movie for you, but you'll still want to see it. It's based on a very popular video game, an RPG, a role-playing game, where characters play in a lifelike reality. It's open map. In this case, they're in a city near a beach. Players can effectively, you can do when you're playing the game, you can do whatever you want, which results in people stealing cars, robbing banks, and buying very cool sneakers. Apparently, that's what we want to do with our freedom. Guy is a non-player character. He's artificial intelligence, AI. He's meant to just be a part of the background, part of the scenery, just doing the same things, walking the same streets all the time. But he becomes self-aware. He gets a pair of glasses and he sees reality. He sees he's stuck inside a video game. And he decides, well, I no longer have to wear my blue shirt. I don't have to drink the same coffee every day. I don't have to work in the same mundane bank job. He's set free. He starts living differently. He had an inkling he was made for something bigger, but now he can see. He puts his glasses on, he finally sees it. Anyway, what he discovers throughout the movie, I'm completely spoiling it, there's something about his author within him, inside of himself. He was made for love. I just gave the whole movie away. The artificial intelligence, the character Guy, all his actions, all his words, all his intelligence, they reflect the coder who made him. And there's this real girl who's playing the game and who the coder, the maker of the game, has loved his whole life, and she meets Guy, she meets the AI and starts falling in love with him, only to quickly realize that she's falling in love with the game's creator, with the maker, the designer. And Guy, the artificial intelligence, is actually just like a love letter from him to her. Kind of sounds weird, but you get the idea. God, the ultimately free one, has made us all in his image. He's made us to love. And as we do that, we experience true freedom. As you start living like you were made to live, as your coder coded you to live, as you start living a life of love, as you accept that you are loved through Jesus and that only he can really open up God's love for you. And then as you start to live out of that love and love the people around you, doing what you were made to do, like the fish you'll swim, like the bird you will fly, like the God you will love, you'll be truly free. You'll experience true freedom when you do that. Jesus is all about freedom. Let me pray. Gracious God, thanks so much for giving us glasses through which to see reality as we read the Bible this morning. We thank you for Paul's letter to the Galatians. We thank you for what we know about their lives. We thank you for how we have found that we're very similar to them in bondage, whether we're trying to fight for our freedom by good works or whether we're trying to fight for our freedom by just defining ourselves and being self-expressors. Help us to realize, to accept that we'll only find freedom if we hold on to Christ. We pray this in Jesus' name. Amen.